I'm going to compare the Odyssey movie with the Barbie movie in terms of aesthetics, storytelling, and Homericness. Now you might think, like, how does that even make sense? Most people don't know this, but the Barbie movie is actually a Greek tragedy of Homeric proportions. And the good thing about this video is that you don't have to watch the Odyssey movie or the Barbie movie in order to appreciate this. And the crazy thing about the Barbie movie that everybody misses is that it is an anti-democracy movie. How many movies overtly preach anti-democracy? It's crazy. The Barbie movie accurately shows the weakness of democracy to the action of secret cabals, to psychological operations, and being pushed into needless warfare. In fact, the Barbie movie takes the beach landing scene from Troy, the 2004 movie about the Trojan War, frame by frame, and makes it its own. So check this out. This is Achilles leading the Myrmidons into the beaches of Troy. And this is Ken leading his guys onto the beaches. And of course, the Trojans are getting prepped up and getting ready to repel the attack in the same way that the Asian Ken, it does the same thing. So these are basically symbolic representations of Achilles and Hector as they face off. Just as the Achaeans assume the shield wall formation, so do the Kens when they are under threat. Now we're racing way far ahead, so let's stop and pause and actually understand one specific scene which I thought was fantastic. There's a scene where Ken says, "I thought the men was run by men and horses, but actually horses are just the extenders of men." Now, is this not true? Is this not Ken's blood memory boiling up from the depths? Is this not his Yamnaya heritage being expressed through his words? In fact, I would rank the domestication of horses as important an invention, as important a technology as the harnessing of fire, the usage of the wheel. The tribes that domesticated horses had more speed than other tribes. They had more range than other tribes. They had more deadliness in combat than other tribes. In other words, it expanded their will to power. It expanded the ability to express their will to power. The ancient Hittites used chariots. The ancient Egyptians used chariots. The ancient Indians used chariots. Rome could not have expanded without their equites. Then let's think about the archers of Genghis Khan. Let's look at the cataphractarii of the Byzantines. Let's look at the Crusader Knights. Let's look at the opposing side, the Saracens. They used horses too, of course. The Polish winged hussars. The Native American warriors. Was not George Washington one of the finest horsemen of his era? And of course, if you look at Alexander, he could not have conquered the known world had he not had Bucephalus. When Achilles dragged the body of Hector around the walls of Troy, he did so from his chariot, which was pulled by horses. So when Ken says, "But now I understand that horses are the extenders of men," is he not 100% right? Is he not 100% right that yes, in fact, horses take the capabilities of man and then magnify them 100-fold? And of course, one of the first wars documented, the Trojan War, was won by horse. Not a real horse, but a wooden horse, the Trojan horse. And we see that, of course, in the Odyssey movie. There are ancient depictions of the Trojan horse showing the Greek warriors inside ready to kill. In fact, the cover of the Iliad by Caroline Alexander has a horse embossed upon it. Why? Because the Iliad, it's called the Iliad because it comes from the city of Ilium, which means the city of horses. In fact, there's a famous passage inside the Iliad. It's called the Night Raid. And in the Night Raid, there's two guys, Diomedes and Odysseus. They go into the Trojan camp to steal what? To steal horses. All this to say, horses are the extenders of men, and Ken got it right instinctually. In fact, there is a horse on the cover of the novel that I'm writing right now. It's called Diomedes of the War Cry. I've launched it on Kickstarter. Even if you're not interested in backing, just go and check out the trailer. Because if you watch this video so far, I kind of understand the kind of man that you are, or woman that you are. You really will enjoy this trailer. So go check it out. It's 2 minutes long. It shows the fates of all the Greek heroes after the war. The fate of Agamemnon, Menelaus, of Hector, and Achilles and Ajax, and all these great men who lived before us. And also the tragic fate of Priam, who was literally clubbed to death using the body of his grandson by Achilles' son. The Trojan War is insane. It's a fascinating period of human history. And immediately after the Trojan War, we have this dark period called the Bronze Age collapse, which is its own enigma. So if you're interested in history and culture, especially martial history and martial culture, this is something that you can't miss. But returning to Barbie Land, what the hell is Barbie Land? Barbie Land is a matriarchy. In this society, all property is owned by women. All the houses are owned by women. All property is owned by women. And essentially, society revolves around the Barbies. All the Barbies, like all the women of the society, are all called Barbies. And here's the cool thing about the movie. The movie does not make this a utopia. It is clearly not, and they show this using irony and even overt action. They show how the Barbies live their life. All the Barbies do every day is wake up in the morning, go to the beach, and at night they party. That's their entire life. In this society, there's no death, there's no decay. There's no need for food, water, or shelter. The houses are literally open to the elements because there are no elements to be scared of. In such a society, it's true that there's nothing to fight against, but there's also nothing to fight for. This is a society without any scarcity, but also without any meaning. When everybody has everything they've ever wanted for free, then there's no pursuit of happiness. Now, this is where we meet our protagonist, Ken. And the movie says that every day is a perfect day for Barbie. But for Ken, it's only a perfect day if Barbie smiles at him. But to be clear, it's not a perfect day even for Barbie herself. So when I say Barbie, usually I'm going to refer to Margot Robbie's character, like the main Barbie essentially. And she asks, have you guys ever thought of dying? What happens is she starts to feel sad. She starts to feel depressed despite the fact that everything is perfect. And that's the instigating event of the story. And the instigating event is a physical deformation. So the Barbies, like, they're dolls, right? So they have their feet like this all the time. But Barbie's feet go flat. And all the other Barbies are aghast because they're like, what is this happening? And how can you be sad in this perfect society? All this kind of thing. So this is what causes Barbie to go on her hero's journey. This entire movie is actually an elegant example of the hero's journey, a very traditional storytelling form. In the traditional hero's journey, the hero's living the perfect life, everything is perfect. Then an instigating event happens. Something happens that cannot be ignored, which causes pain, which causes the hero to go outside their regular world into another world in order to find the solution, find the Promethean fire. And that's what happens. So Barbie gets ready to go. She starts to go to reality. In this universe, there's two worlds. There's the Barbie land, and there's reality. And the way the magic system works is that each Barbie has its owner, like an actual human being who lives in reality. The emotional state of the actual humans living in reality leaches onto the Barbies, causes depression, causes, for example, the main Barbie's foot to be flat. So Margot Robbie is leaving Barbie land to go to reality to cheer her human up so that her feet are fixed and she doesn't have depression anymore. But as she does so, as she's in the car, Ken stows away with her. Now she tries to get him to leave, but he doesn't leave. So she's like, you know what, I'm stuck with you anyway. And they both go into reality to explore it. Now we have a very interesting scene, which was controversial, but I don't know why it was controversial. So all the kind of right-wing tadpoles like Shapiro all freaked out at this scene, and they said that it was feminist propaganda. But I didn't feel that it was. The character of Barbie never went through puberty. She pretty much emerged fully formed as an adult. So when she visits reality for the first time, she gets unwanted attention from men, but she's not used to it. She doesn't know how to react. And this is the story of every girl that you know, including your sister, your mother, your girlfriend, your wife. Every single girl you know has gone through this. This is actually an experience that we as men have no idea about. Because for men, we are not that attractive to women until we're 21. But for women, some of them start experiencing this kind of thing at age 15, 16. But at this point, they're still children. So I think this portrayal of the awkwardness and difficulty of being a young woman, like a woman who's going through puberty, is actually accurate and well done. But in any case, let's see what Ken is up to. So Ken has his own little journey of looking at what a man looks like. And they have this fantastic montage of masculinity, as it were. They show off Stallone and Rambo. They show off male police officers upon horseback, maintaining law and order. They show golf. They show men in the gym getting stronger. They show martial arts. They show men fist bumping each other, encouraging each other to do better. They show the faces of presidents upon the dollar bill. They show cowboys. They show all the cool stuff. If nothing else, go and look for something like Ken City Montage, and you'll probably find it. But just watch that. It's like a minute and a half segment, which I thought was the best part of the movie. For the first time ever in his life, Ken realizes what a man can be. But however, he sees an incomplete picture. And it's as Hormozi says, the Rocky cutscene in the movie is 6 seconds long, but in reality it's 6 years long. And this is the part that Ken misses. He sees the fruits of the labor, he sees the excellence that man can aspire to, but doesn't see the sacrifices required for that. If you want to be a doctor, that's cool. Go to med school for 10 plus years. Oh, you want to be a special forces operator? Okay, that's nice. Go to the Q course. Also, you want to be an entrepreneur? Neat. In that case, risk your life savings multiple times, work for years without reward, and then see if you want to be an entrepreneur. But this is the thing. This is the tragedy of Ken just being foreshadowed. They say that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Ken doesn't know what he doesn't know. Ken talks to a doctor because he wants to be a surgeon, and he gets turned down by a woman who's more competent than him, an actual doctor. Then Ken tries to go get a high-powered banking job, but he gets turned down because he doesn't have an MBA by a man who is a banker. Then Ken tries to go and be a lifeguard, But he can't do that because he can't swim and the lifeguard calls him out on it. So what's the point I'm trying to make here? The point I'm trying to make is that it doesn't really matter so much if you're male or female. It more so matters what your competence level is. Do you have the medical degree? Do you have the MBA? Do you have the ability to swim and demonstrate it? And because Ken doesn't have these skills, he gets turned down by women and men. So if it was true that men just give out handouts to other men, then Ken would have got these jobs. But it's not true. In fact, the thing which competent men despise the most is an incompetent man. Ken does not get freebies for being a man, and the movie clearly demonstrates and shows this. And even in your own life, think about this. If you're drowning, do you really care if the lifeguard who saves you is female or male? No, you just care about getting saved. In the same way, if you have to get a life-threatening tumor removed or something, do you care about if it's male or female, or do you care about like how good the surgeon is? Because at the end of the day, the most important thing, and hell, maybe the only important thing, is the level of skill, the time-on problem, the competence. Now, as Ken is going through this journey, well, what's Barbie up to? Barbie has located the human beings that she's linked to, and her job is to cheer her up. And that's how we were introduced to this mother-daughter duo who are going to be an important part of the story going forward. Now, Barbie returns to Barbie Land with that mother-daughter duo to see that Ken has taken over. I love this part of the movie. I thought it was a lot of fun. One of the lines that Ken says is basically everything exists to expand and elevate the presence of man. Like, is he not actually correct about that? Everything that exists, even in a biblical sense, everything that exists to expand the presence of man. Here, I don't define man as male, but man as in mankind. I mean, this is essentially the progress of mankind. When man decided that he was going to turn fallow land into fertile soil from which he can grow crops, he basically transformed something that wasn't useful into a resource. That is literally what it is meant when Ken says basically everything exists to expand and elevate the presence of man. With time, with progress, we find technologies to convert resources around us to elevate our presence. Now, of course, as Barbie goes around and finds the changes that Ken has made, she's not happy, and she comes to her own home and says, this is my dream house, this is mine. But this is an interesting thing. What is meant by having something be yours? What does mine even mean? If you have a house, and then somebody else moves into your house and you can't kick them out, is that house yours anymore? And think about this. If you fail to pay your property taxes on time and the government seizes your house, was it even really ever your house? There is a dimension of owning something. There's a dimension of possessing anything that if you are not able to protect your ownership of that thing, then you don't really even own it, do you? And that's what's happened here. Ken has just taken over Barbie's house. Oftentimes we think of ownership as a legal thing, like something that's written on paper. So for example, if somebody asks me, like, prove that this car is yours, well, I'll show like the title and the license and stuff like that, legal stuff to say that this car is mine. But the actual truth is, if something happened and the government seized this car, there's not much that I can do about it. But hey, we'll talk about that topic in a second. I want to go to something else right now. The other Barbies, right? They actually love this new society that Ken has created for them. They call it Kendom. The scientist Barbie says, isn't this great? The doctor Barbie says something like, I like not having to make decisions. The president Barbie says, I'd rather serve beer than be president. So like, this is not me making this up, right? The dialogues from the movie is what I'm using. So I'm maintaining a relatively neutral stance on this, right? All the Barbies, by the movie's logic, by the movie's own dialogues, love Kendom. Unironically, they support and want to see the furtherance of Kendom. Like the reporter Barbie is reporting that Ken's changed stuff for the better, and she can't get her hands off of this other guy, this cowboy guy. Now, for sure, you can look at all this and say that the Barbies have been brainwashed, but that isn't true. We actually know how this conversion happened. The movie pretty much tells us that all Ken had to do is, quote unquote, I just explained the immaculate logic of patriarchy, and everybody kind of followed his will. In other words, the Barbies supporting Kendom, well, that is not a sign of brainwashing. That's called free will. Because all that happened is that Ken came in, gave a speech, and then everybody converted. That's not brainwashing. Now, for sure, you can disagree with the values that Ken is pushing on the society. That's fine. You can disagree with the values, but that doesn't mean that it's brainwashing. And speaking of brainwashing, we do actually see real brainwashing later in this movie, but it's not the Kens who do it. It's the Barbies. And here we have another funny dialogue. Ken says, if it wasn't for the MBAs, the medical degrees, and the swim lessons, I would have ruled that space. But I don't need any of that stuff here. So the difference between Barbie Land and reality is that reality requires competence. Barbie Land is make-believe. That's the fundamental difference between these two universes. This is a fascinating point unto itself because it's calling out all the people who complain about bias without improving their own competency. Like all the people who says, I'm the wrong race, that's why I'm not succeeding. I'm the wrong gender, that's why I'm not succeeding. I'm not tall enough, that's not why I'm succeeding. Like all these people who make excuses instead of working harder and getting better. All these people are essentially living in fantasy. They're living in Barbie Land. They're not living in reality. And this Barbie movie is calling those people out. Like all these midwits like Shapiro were complaining that the Barbie movie is a feminist propaganda piece. But it's clearly not. It has a good message, which I think everybody can appreciate. And then we have this other fascinating scene. Now Barbie freaks out because her home is taken. She says, "You can't change society in a single day." And Ken says, literally and figuratively, "Watch me." What a cool scene. I love this. He shows the Kenic energy, the aura. Now, at this point, you might feel bad for Barbie, but don't feel bad for Barbie. Because earlier in the movie, the little girl asks Barbie, like, "Hey, where do all the Kens live?" She's like, "I don't know." So the Kens didn't even have a home. So is it so wrong for them to go and conquer what they can? And again, we see this elegant portrayal of the hero's journey. So Ken left his home. He went on a hero's journey to another world. He saw ideas in the other world and then brought it back to his own world to enact. That is a core idea in the hero's journey. It's called the return home. He's bringing back the Promethean fire. He's expressing his will to power. This is Ken in his Aristeia. Ken is a conqueror. Ken is a Napoleon. Ken is a Caesar. And this whole horse aesthetic, this cowboy aesthetic, like cowboys are the best example of the wandering spirit, the exploration spirit, the spirit to expand. And to be clear, it's not just men who love horses, it's women who love horses. Like, have you ever talked to a girl who had been like raised around horses or something? Like, women love horses. And there's a reason for this. They completely get the symbolism behind a horse. The horse is a powerful being of skull-crushing intensity. But under the right circumstances, it can be a powerhouse for progress. And even going back to the Iliad, many times the heroes of the Trojan War are called horse-breaking. It's called like horse-breaking Hector or horse-breaking Ajax. It's one of the common Homeric epithets. Epithets are these little taglines which they affix to the names of these warriors to kind of boost them up, but also make it fit better in the poem itself. Again, using the epithet of horse-breaking so commonly shows us again how important horses were in the ancient world, but of course throughout human history. Now that Barbie is defeated, she goes and she cries and she sits down. But here's something interesting that happens. Barbie and her like two friends, like the mother and the daughter, they go to this weird place where all the reject Barbies are, all the rejects of society, like all the discarded Barbies are. And here, the mother, like the mother from reality, she gives this speech. And I actually thought that this speech was really good. But for some reason, a lot of people on the internet hated it. Again, they were claiming that it's feminist propaganda, but I don't think it is. The speech was actually very clear. The problem that the speech addresses is that women have to aspire to two standards, while men only have to aspire to one. The standard for men is pretty clear. Make more money, be more capable, be more competent, assume leadership positions. Like all these things are fairly easy to understand, and we as men can understand that this is how we win. For women, they have to do all these things, which is the improving in the career, making more money, but also they got to be a good mother. Also, they have to have children. Like, this is actually a lot to ask. Women have this double pressure where society needs them to make money and grow in their career, but also be a mother and also have kids and raise kids. It's crazy how much expectation and pressure that we put on women. And I think that this speech actually does a good job of showing that. I'll show you a funny example to drive this home. I was talking to this lady after the meditation retreat, and she's telling me that one of the things that she was torn about is that she had this amazing career at Amazon. Like, she was making $200,000 plus every single year. But doing that job, she cannot have children because it will distract her from the mission. So what Amazon did is that they pay for her to freeze her eggs. Like, freezing eggs is not cheap. It's pretty expensive. It's like $20,000 plus. But Amazon does this for free for their female employees. So generous, right? So kind, so understanding. Or is it that they would rather have their women work rather than be distracted by pregnancy? In other words, they are calculating a return on investment. They don't want to lose talent. They don't actually care about these women. They care about the work they do. In other words, Amazon and all these big companies will happily thwart the reproductive success of their employees so that they can get financial success. Anyways, we come back to Barbie Land. Now the movie intelligently exposes the power that cabals have over a democracy. So what happens is the reject Barbies, the mother and the daughter, and the main Barbie, Margot Robbie, they all start to physically kidnap the other Barbies in that land and brainwash them. You know, I was talking about brainwashing before? Like, this is actual brainwashing and kidnapping. They literally physically remove these women, put them in a small room, and they basically talk to them until their brain changes. Like, this is what a re-education camp looks like. It's the Barbies which do the brainwashing. So what do we see here? Barbie Land is essentially structured as a democracy. What happens is the Kens, along with their supporting Barbies, they cast a vote and they convert the constitution of the Barbie Land to Kendom. Like, okay, got it. So that's a democratic process. What happens here is a small cabal of people start to kidnap citizens, brainwash them to change the political dynamic. That's called a psychological operation, and it gets even worse. So what happens is the Barbies do this plan, right? So they sit around the campfire with all their respective Kens. So each Barbie like pairs herself with one Ken. And they basically seduce these Kens. And then at their moment where they're feeling most comfortable, where they feel like they've gotten the love of the women who they desired, the women switch it up. They go to like another man. All of them go to another man. And as a result, we have the outbreak of violence. So this is the first armed conflict in the entire movie, and it's caused because these women decided to manipulate their men into fighting each other. Like, I'm not even making this up. This is the movie as it is. Like, I'm not even putting a spin on it. If you watch the movie, this is exactly what happens. And that's why we get this scene from the Trojan War. We have Achilles, aka Ken, attacking by the sea, and we have Hector, also Ken, defending his beach. But of course, this entire battle, this entire war, was fought for no other reason than the Barbies needed to get together at the presidential house and cast a new vote to change the constitution back to Barbie land. In other words, the cabal caused a distraction in the form of warfare in order to enact political change. What does this remind you of? Is this not something which happens in real life? And here the movie gets even more aggressive with its messaging. Unlike the tragedy of the Trojan War, the Kens actually realize that they're being manipulated and they join forces and they come to the capital to see what's going on. So all the Kens ride in and they assume a shield wall formation in order to fight. And when they do this, look at the expressions on all the women's faces. They're all scared. Like, are they going to attack right now? Are we done? Because you could say that it's justified. Because if this is in fact a democratic society where men and women both have citizenship and equal voting rights, then what's happened, like this is not even me making this up, is that the women, the Barbies, literally sent away the men to fight, and then they casted votes in order to change the constitution. Imagine if that happened in real life. Would it not be completely justified for the men who are coming back, the veterans of the war, to demand their rights in the constitution, demand their rights in the democracy? Of course it would. And that's why the women are scared. But, however, this is what happens in the movie. The Kens ask the main Ken, "Who are we attacking, sir?" And this is where Ken breaks down and he says, "I don't know." This is important too. Because can Ken use violence against the Barbies? No, of course not. He's not going to beat up women, but you got to think, he was this close to snapping. The important point I'm trying to make here is that all laws, including the Constitution itself, is nothing more than a piece of paper. It only carries value. It only carries meaning in the real world. It only has real world consequences because there are people out there who are willing to put their body on the line in order to enforce the ideals of what's written on that piece of paper. In other words, if the Kens felt betrayed by the Barbies, changing their constitution behind their backs, they could have used violence in order to rip up the constitution and create a new one. Democracy is a compromise we've all agreed on. As soon as that agreement goes away, democracy goes away. People assume that democracy is some kind of end state, that once a society has reached democracy, well, it has to stay there forever and that's the end of the game. But that's just blatantly not true. The United States, it was called the Great Experiment, and so far for the 250 years that the United States has been a country, the democracy has largely worked. But in the future, if the citizenry feel that the democracy is not for them, that it is corrupt, that it's not in their best interests, then they have every right to tear it down in the same way that the American revolutionaries back in the day, 250 years ago, tore down their existing government to build a new one. That is why George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and all these gentlemen are revered, because they had the guts to say, we don't like the deal we have and we are going to change it. In other words, the Canarchic Revolution almost happened, but it was missed by a hair's breadth, and the reason for that is, of course, the Greek tragedy element of this entire movie. Ken's fundamental motivation from the start has been to acquire the love, the appreciation, and the attention from Barbie. So him following his will to power, in this case, directly opposed that, because if he followed that, then he would lose Barbie forever. So in the end, he chooses to forego his will to power in the favor of trying to get Barbie's affection. But even here, the movie does a really cool job of handling this. So in this scene, we see Ken sobbing and he's sad and he's crying and Barbie comes to console him. And here she gives a speech straight out of Fight Club of all movies. So she says, "You are not your girlfriend, you're not your house, you're not the mink that you wear, you're not your beach." This is the same exact sentence format and the speech format as what Tyler Durden says to the boys. He says, "You're not your job, you're not how much money you have in the bank, you're not the car you drive, you're not the contents of your wallet, you are not your fucking khakis." Same exact concept delivered by Barbie. How fascinating that the same myth theme transmits across these two very different movies. So looking at this from the perspective of the hero's journey, well, Ken has completed his arc and he's beginning a new one because Barbie explicitly tells him, hey, your identity cannot be based on your love and affection towards me. You got to find your own passion and your own love and your own path forward. So the point of the hero's journey is that once you complete the hero's journey, guess what happens? You start a brand new hero's journey. And I found this meme, by the way, which I thought was hilarious. I thought it was funny. And now that Ken's story arc is completed, let's actually go and look at what Barbie's story arc looks, because she's getting to the end of her hero's journey as well. But let's look at the situation. So she's restored Barbie land and all the property belongs to the females again, the Barbies again. Okay, cool. So are we back to square one? Actually, no. The point of the hero's journey is that after you finish the whole journey and you come back to where you started, you have transformed. The environment has also transformed. So you're actually in a new setting, despite the fact that they have a lot of similarities. And here is how the movie shows her next hero's journey. She goes to a gynecologist. This is interesting because it essentially implies that Barbie the doll has chosen to become Barbie the human. And it begs some interesting questions. If she's going to a gynecologist, does it imply then that she has the ability now to reproduce, which is an ability that of course a doll would not have? And of course, downstream of that question is, does she want to reproduce? Will she have a child? And what is the movie trying to say with this? Is the movie saying that Barbie has foregone all the material pleasures of life? So because Barbie land was the land of material pleasures, you partied every day, you didn't need food, you didn't need water, there was no diseases, there was no aging. Has she foregone all of that in order to become a real woman who can have children? Does it mean that she's essentially stepped out of the Garden of Eden and into real world? This is a fascinating ascension in my view, and I'm glad the movie has taken it in this direction. So there we have it. That's the new hero's journey. Now Barbie the doll is ended. Barbie the woman has emerged. Now quickly, let's go to a whole new world. Let's go to the world of the Odyssey. Specifically, let's go to the island of Aea, where Circe lives. Now Circe is this goddess, a semi-divine being, a being of powerful magic, a beautiful, beautiful goddess of surpassing, astonishing, exquisite, wondrous beauty. And she was depicted in this movie by a hag in a shack. Very sad to see Nolan do this, but even so, the point is that Circe is powerful, way more powerful than any of the men, more powerful than Odysseus, more powerful than his entire crew, and yet, in this movie, she's portrayed as the victim. In other words, she doesn't have agency. So when Nolan tried to subvert the story of Circe, subvert the story of Odysseus, he wanted to make this probably more like, Hollywood friendly in order to win his awards that he wants to win. But in so doing, he has actually done a disservice to women. Here's another example. The sirens. One of the famous parts of the Odyssey myth is that when he's traveling across the ocean, there's these sirens, these beautiful like mermaid-like creatures who sit up on these rocks and they sing these songs and they lure sailors to their doom, to their death. But in the movie, they don't even show the sirens. They just have these kind of like random sounds playing, music playing, and Odysseus shrieking, and that's pretty much it. But in all other depictions of this event, of course, the sirens are beautiful women who use their charms and use their voice and all this kind of stuff to attract these men to their doom. But of course, Nolan cannot show this because it shows women being in the bad, right? In the bad camp. But he can't do that because it's wrong, right? It's wrong according to Hollywood to make women the oppressor or the bad ones. In taking away women's ability to do bad, you take away their agency, which is stupid, of course. If you have agency, you can do good or bad with that agency. And then we have the scene in Sparta where we meet Menelaus and Helen of Troy. Now, even without going into the casting choices behind Helen of Troy, what's interesting is Helen's face is scarred. It's implied that Menelaus has scarred her face. But of course, in Odyssey, the book, Helen is not scarred. In fact, Helen takes responsibility for the Trojan War. She says that she was wrong to run away with Paris. And her doing this, her lack of discipline, her lack of loyalty is what caused the death and destruction of so many people and so much property. But in the movie, she's the victim, right? She's scarred by Menelaus. And it's implied that the reason why the war started is because Agamemnon wanted control of these trade routes, which of course Homer never mentions. My point is, again, they've taken away agency from Helen. Homer actually gives Helen agency. Helen actually takes responsibility for her actions. But in the movie, Helen has no responsibility over her actions. So I'm actually for women empowerment, correct? I'm just for pairing power with responsibility. As Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great responsibility. If you want to give women power, that's fine, but it has to come paired with responsibility. Otherwise, the storytelling just feels broken. And of course, the worst and most egregious thing that Nolan has done is that the portrayal of Calypso. So Calypso is a sea nymph, and she takes Odysseus and imprisons him for 7 years. So all the ordeals of Odysseus, his trapment by the Cyclops, the Scylla and the Charybdis, the journey to the underworld, transformation of his crew into pigs by Circe, like all this stuff only takes 3 years. So he could have been in Ithaca in 3 years. But Calypso traps him for 7 years. She was the biggest obstacle between him and home. And in Homer's Odyssey, that's very clearly shown. In fact, the gods themselves have to intervene to let him go, to let him escape. But in the movie, it's chill. Like, think about how weird this is, right? Calypso detains Odysseus against his will and has non-consensual sex with him over the period of 7 years. And in Homer, it's clearly shown as a bad thing, like a bad event that's happened, and Odysseus is the victim of this sea nymph, this powerful goddess's domineering lusts, essentially. But in the movie, no, it's none of that. She's good. She's good. All she did is keep him for 7 years. And that's chill. That's not a problem. So what are we doing here? So in the Odyssey movie, if anything bad happens, it's always done by men. If anything good happens, it's always done by women. No woman can ever do anything bad. And even if you believe that to be true, even if you actually believe that that's the case, it's just bad storytelling. It doesn't make for an engaging story. And once we're all the way back home in Ithaca, we have this stupid scene where Penelope, Odysseus' wife and the mother of Telemachus, she yells at him, like getting close to his face like a drill sergeant, and just yells at him with spit flying and everything. But basically what happens is Telemachus is like, he knows that Odysseus is home and he's getting ready to take the throne, or he's getting ready to become the king. And he's just saying that, and she freaks out at him saying, "You think that you can be king, but I need to be queen because I've been on the throne of Ithaca for the past 10 years and none of my responsibility counts, none of my experience counts. Like, why can't I become the ruler instead of you? It's just because you're a man and that's why you're getting the kingship. And actually, it should be me." It's like, it sounds so stupid because look at every single person in the entire Homeric universe. Look at Achilles, look at Odysseus, look at Diomedes, Ajax, Agamemnon, Menelaus, Hector, Aeneas, Memnon, Penthesilea, Hippolyta. All these characters, some of them are women, all of them have rulership positions and leadership positions because they can fight. Penelope cannot fight. She's clever, yes, but she is not capable of physical violence. And at the end of the day, despite all of Odysseus' smartness and wiles and cunning, at the end of the day, it did come down to the bearing of arms. It came down to kicking out the suitors from his home using the power of violence. Straight up bronze on flesh is what it took in the end to clear them out. And that's what Penelope could not provide. And that disqualifies her from ever being a leader. In other words, the Barbie movie actually does a much better job of portraying female power. Remember what I told you before. Barbie starts to yell at some point, "This is my dream house, this is mine." But what does it mean for something to be yours? You have to be able to defend it with the force of arms. If you cannot do that, then it is not yours. And so, in the Barbie movie, what do the Barbies do? They use secretive cabals, they use manipulation, and they use other tactics, not physical violence, in order to get their property back. This is a fascinating portrayal of female power. See, they have agency here, right? Now, we can sit and debate if they were right or wrong to use manipulation to get their property back. That's fine. That's a debate that is legitimate and we can have that debate. But the fact of the matter is, they could do that. But in the Nolan's Odyssey, they don't have the ability to use manipulation and like subversive tactics. At the end of the day, property ownership comes down to the ability to do violence. Like, that is what it comes down to in the end. Either you defend your stuff yourself, or you got to call the cops, or you call higher authorities who will defend it for you. Like, those are the only two options. Now, coming back to the Odyssey and coming back to the Homeric universe, a lot of people don't know, but the Iliad and the Odyssey, the story of Achilles and the story of Odysseus, are a part of a wider universe, a part of a much bigger series of books, most of which have been lost. Only fragments survive. The Cypria, lost. The Little Iliad, lost. The Eleuperissus, which is the sacking of Troy, is lost. Like, all these texts are just lost to time. And for me specifically, one of the heroes of the Trojan War stand out more than any other, and his name is Diomedes. Diomedes has cunning like Odysseus. In fact, Odysseus and Diomedes are the men who lead the night raids into the Trojan camps to steal their horses. In fact, it's Diomedes who raises his hand first and volunteers, and he picks Odysseus to come with him. And in terms of physical courage as well, Achilles doesn't fight for the first 20 books of the Iliad. And the Iliad is only composed of 24 books, so it's only in the last 4 books that Achilles actually takes the battlefield. Until that point, it's Ajax and Diomedes who are taking the forefront. And despite all this, Diomedes is lost to history. Like probably before this video, you haven't even heard the name Diomedes, despite the fact that you've heard of Odysseus and Achilles. And that's why I'm writing this book. It's called Diomedes of the War Cry. If the world of Homer is something that you're interested, if you're invested in that world, then I would recommend that you check out the trailer that I've made. Even if you don't end up backing this Kickstarter project, check out the trailer because it's really cool. This trailer shows you what happens to each of the heroes after they're into the Trojan War. And a quick update, the Kickstarter actually recently just got fully funded, and I announced that everybody who buys this book is going to get free shipping. So if shipping was tripping you up before and you didn't back, well, that concern is gone now. So with that, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.